All right, welcome to your very own deep dive.
Ooh.
This one goes out to you specifically.
Oh, wow.
Because you requested it, and we are so excited to dive into it with you.
I'm excited to be here.
It's Desiderius Erasmus.
Right.
One of the most influential figures of the Renaissance. And we've got biographies, we've got historical texts, we've got scholarly articles, like all the good stuff.
Excited to dig in.
To like really unpack who this guy was.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to be surprised by some of the stuff we learn about him because his story is anything but ordinary.
Well, it's true. I mean, his life was, turbulent and brilliant.
Yeah.
And he left a mark on intellectual history.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so I feel like to get us started, for someone who might not be familiar with Erasmus,
Right.
who was he and like how do we even begin?
Okay, so Erasmus
Yeah.
was born in 1467 in Rotterdam.
Okay.
And his early life was marked by hardship. So born out of wedlock, orphaned at a young age.
Oh, wow.
And then, to make matters worse,
Yeah.
his guardians pushed him into monastic life,
Oh, wow. So
which really shaped his views on
the
religion and education.
That's so interesting because you think like monastery, that would make someone like anti-education.
Right.
Like why would you want more structure?
Yeah.
But he was like, no, I'm into this.
That's what's so interesting about him.
Yeah.
He, instead of turning away from learning,
Yeah.
he found solace and empowerment in it.
Wow.
He excelled at writing, used it to hone his skills, built a network of like-minded friends through letters.
Oh.
And you could already see this passion for learning in his early work.
Okay.
Like the Anti-Barbarorum Liberum.
What?
Which translates to Book of Anti-Barbarians.
Anti-barbarians. So even as a young guy, he was like,
Yes.
I'm going against the grain. I'm
Challenging conventional thinking.
writing this book, Anti-Barbarians.
Right.
And this is during his time in the monastery.
Yes.
What are the barbarians that he's like so against?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So at that time, barbarians was a term used to criticize those who opposed or disregarded classical learning.
Okay.
Which was the literature, philosophy, and history of ancient Greece and Rome.
So he was really like way ahead of his time.
He saw the value in these ancient texts.
This old stuff is actually good.
Timeless wisdom and insights.
When everyone else was like,
right.
No, we've moved past that.
Exactly.
That's so fascinating. It makes you wonder like how this early experience of being in this monastery where it was a lot of rigid theological studies might have shaped his later critiques of the church and his push for more like a humanist approach to education.
Those early tensions between his love for classical learning and the more restrictive environment of the monastery definitely planted the seeds for a lot of his later ideas.
So how did he get out of the monastery?
Well, he didn't stay there his whole life.
Okay.
A major turning point came when he left the monastery to become a secretary for the Bishop of Cambrai.
Ooh, interesting.
Sounds like a mundane desk job.
Yeah.
But it gave him a taste of freedom and new opportunities.
Freedom in what sense? Like, was he traveling, meeting new people?
Exactly. So this secretarial position allowed him to travel, observe courtly life, and further refine his writing skills.
So he's out in the world?
He's exposed to a world beyond the walls of the monastery.
Yeah. Okay. But he wasn't?
But it wasn't all smooth sailing.
Okay.
Erasmus had his sights on something much bigger. Italy. The heart of the Renaissance.
The epicenter of art and literature.
Exactly.
It's like the Silicon Valley.
It was the place to be
on the Renaissance
for scholars like Erasmus.
Okay.
Unfortunately, his hopes of going there were dashed when the bishop's attempt to become a cardinal, which would have taken Erasmus to Rome, failed.
So close.
So close.
But knowing Erasmus, he didn't give up that easy.
He was persistent.
So how did he finally make his way?
Well, despite this setback, he managed to secure funding to study theology at the University of Paris.
Okay.
Huge step forward.
Yeah.
But even there, he encountered resistance.
What do you mean?
So the scholastic methods of teaching, which relied heavily on logic and disputation.
Okay, for those of us who aren't like medieval scholars, what does that mean? Like what?
So imagine a classroom where learning is all about debating minute points of theology, often in very abstract And complex language.
Oh, okay.
And there's a strong emphasis on logic and reasoning.
Yeah.
But it can feel very removed.
Oh.
From the practicalities of faith and daily life.
Gotcha. So it was like this strict...
That's what scholasticism was like.
Yeah.
And it was a far cry from the humanist approach.
Like a different kind of barbarian for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He felt this type of learning was too rigid.
Okay.
Too focused on argumentation for its own sake.
Gotcha.
And not enough on the spirit of the texts themselves.
So here's this brilliant scholar
right.
at one of the most prestigious universities in Europe, and it's not quite the right fit.
Doesn't quite fit.
You have to wonder if this experience, like, further fueled...
It must have.
His desire to reform education.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's almost ironic that a leading humanist scholar like Erasmus found himself struggling in such a traditional academic setting.
Wow.
He even described his time at the Collège de Montaigu, a particularly strict college within the university, as restrictive and unhealthy.
Like a real clash of cultures.
Yeah.
So what was he doing during this time? Was he just like enduring these scholastic debates?
Yeah. Even amidst the challenges of scholasticism, Erasmus was incredibly productive. This is when he began to make a name for himself with his early publications. And it was during this time that he encountered the work of Lorenzo Valla, a scholar who had made a remarkable discovery.
Wait, who is Lorenzo Valla and what had he discovered?
Valla was an Italian humanist scholar, and his discovery was a bombshell. He exposed a document called the Donation of Constantine as a forgery.
Okay, a forged document. That sounds intriguing, but I'm a bit lost. What was the Donation of Constantine, and why was this discovery so significant?
Well, the Donation of Constantine was a document that had been used for centuries to justify the political power of the popes. It claimed that the Roman Emperor Constantine had granted vast territories to the church.
Wow, so this document was like the foundation of papal authority.
In many ways, yes. But Valla, through meticulous analysis of the language and historical context, proved that it was a fake, created centuries after Constantine.
That's amazing. It's like something out of a historical detective novel. And what was it about this discovery that resonated with Erasmus?
What's fascinating here is that this exposed forgery highlighted the power of scholarship to challenge established authority. This idea became a central theme in Erasmus's work. He saw how carefully studying language and history could be used to question those in power, a perspective that would, as you can imagine, get him into some trouble later on.
It sounds like he wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers. So was this discovery like a light bulb moment for Erasmus, a turning point in his intellectual journey?
Absolutely. It showed him the power of critical thinking and how scholarly rigor could expose falsehoods, even those long held and supported by powerful institutions. This was a lesson he wouldn't forget.
Okay, so we have Erasmus at the University of Paris, grappling with scholasticism, discovering the power of scholarship to challenge authority. What happens next in this intellectual adventure?
Well, despite his struggles with the academic environment in Paris, his reputation as a scholar was growing. This led to an important invitation. He was invited to England, where he met a group of like-minded scholars, including John Colet and Thomas More.
John Colet and Thomas More. Weren't they major figures in English humanism? It sounds like he was finally finding his intellectual tribe.
Well, exactly. This trip to England was a pivotal moment for Erasmus. He found himself surrounded by intellectuals who shared his passion for classical learning and his desire to reform education and the church.
This connection with English humanists makes me think of his most famous work, his translation of the New Testament. Was that project already brewing in his mind at this point?
You're right to connect those dots.
Yeah.
This trip was crucial in shaping his approach to biblical scholarship. During his time in England, he was inspired to improve his Greek, a skill that would prove essential for his groundbreaking translation. He realized that to truly understand the Bible, he needed to go back to the original Greek text, not rely solely on the Latin translations that were common at the time.
So he's at this intellectual crossroads, questioning traditional authority, embracing humanist ideas, and realizing the importance of going back to the source, to the original languages. It sounds like all the pieces are falling into place.
You're absolutely right. These experiences laid the groundwork for what would become his most influential and controversial work. But before we delve into that, let's trace his journey a bit further. After England, Erasmus returned to the continent, spending time in Italy, even receiving a rather dubious doctorate in theology from the University of Turin.
A dubious doctorate? What do you mean? Was there a scandal?
Well, let's just say there's some questions surrounding the legitimacy of that degree. It seems he may have received it more as an honorary gesture than a recognition of his actual studies in Turin.
Ah, it's a bit of academic intrigue. But despite this questionable degree, I imagine his reputation continued to grow.
Oh, absolutely. By this point, he was becoming a celebrity scholar, publishing widely, traveling, and engaging in lively debates. This all sets the stage for a remarkable period in his life, a time when he truly becomes a public intellectual.
This is where Erasmus goes from scholar to influencer, right? He publishes his most famous work, The Praise of Folly, and sparks a lot of debate.
Exactly. From around 1511 to 1536, he's no longer just writing for a small circle of scholars. He's running for a broad audience. And he's not afraid to use humor and satire to provoke and challenge.
Okay, so let's talk about The Praise of Folly. I have to admit, it's not a title you hear every day. What's it about?
It's a brilliant and incredibly witty work. On the surface, it's a satirical speech given by Folly herself, praising her own virtues. But beneath the humor, it's a sharp critique of everything from monastic hypocrisy and the excesses of the church to the pointless squabbles of scholastic scholars and the folly of war.
So he's using humor to point out the absurdity of the world around him. Did people get the joke? Was it well received?
It was an instant success, but it also landed him in hot water. While many people were delighted by its wit and insightful observations, those in power, particularly within the church, were less amused.
I can imagine. This idea of a satirical work critiquing those in power sounds very familiar. It's like the Renaissance equivalent of political cartoons or late-night comedy shows.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And like those modern-day satirists, Erasmus faced criticism and even accusations of heresy for his bold critiques.
So he's using satire and wit to expose the flaws of society and the church. And it's making him famous, but also attracting some powerful enemies. It seems like Erasmus was walking a tightrope.
He was, and this is where his concept of the philosophy of the Silenus comes into play.
Okay, philosophy of the Silenus. I have to admit I'm drawing a blank. Can you explain that one?
Of course. It's a fascinating concept that Erasmus drew from Plato's Symposium. In that dialogue, Socrates describes Silenus figures, which were these little statues that looked like goofy woodland creatures, but inside they held images of the gods.
So it's like judging a book by its cover, or in this case, a statue. What appears silly or superficial on the outside can hold profound meaning within.
Exactly. Erasmus saw this reflected in his own work, especially in The Praise of Folly. He used humor and satire to deliver serious critiques. He believed that sometimes the best way to expose foolishness and hypocrisy is to make people laugh at it.
That's clever. It's like sneaking in serious ideas under the guise of entertainment.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about poking fun. It was a way to get people thinking critically about important issues.
Precisely. Erasmus believed that laughter could be a powerful tool for social change. It could disarm people's defenses and make them more receptive to new ideas.
It seems like Erasmus understood the power of storytelling and using humor to make a point. But The Praise of Folly wasn't his only project during this time, right? He was also working on other, perhaps less controversial works.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, alongside these satirical works, Erasmus was incredibly prolific in producing educational works.
Yeah.
He published Adagia, a massive collection of proverbs colloquia, which were dialogues meant to teach Latin in a more engaging way, and paraphrases, which offer clear explanations of biblical texts.
It sounds like he was creating a whole Renaissance curriculum for the masses. He wasn't content to leave knowledge locked away in monasteries or debated only by scholars.
That's a crucial insight. Erasmus believed that everyone, regardless of their background, should have access to the wisdom of the ancients and the teachings of Christianity. He championed a simpler, more ethical form of faith that resonated with people across social classes. He believed that learning should be accessible and enjoyable, not just a dry academic pursuit.
It's amazing how he managed to balance these different aspects of his intellectual life, the serious scholarship with the satirical wit, and all of this while navigating the tumultuous world of the Reformation. It seems like everything was changing around him.
It was a time of immense upheaval, both intellectually and religiously, and Erasmus found himself caught in the middle of it all.
So where did Erasmus stand amidst all this religious turmoil? Did he side with Martin Luther and the Reformers?
That's a great question, and it's one that historians still debate. Erasmus initially sympathized with some of Martin Luther's critiques of the church. He too saw the need for reform.
So they were on the same page, at least initially.
In some ways, yes. They both believed that the church had become too focused on worldly power and had strayed from the true spirit of Christianity. However, Erasmus ultimately broke with Luther over key theological issues.
What were those issues that divided them? It sounds like they had a lot in common.
One of the biggest points of contention was the issue of free will. Luther believed that human beings were essentially powerless to choose salvation. It was all predestined by God. Erasmus, on the other hand, believed that humans had a choice, that they could choose to follow God's path or reject it. This difference in belief was fundamental and led to a very public and bitter falling out between the two men.
So they started out as allies in reform, but ended up on opposite sides of the theological chasm. It must have been a difficult and confusing time for Erasmus.
It was. His commitment to peace, unity, and intellectual freedom clashed with the increasingly divisive religious climate of the Reformation. He was caught in the middle, criticized by both Catholics and Protestants.
It's fascinating how he tried to navigate this increasingly polarized world. He had this deep faith, but also this critical mind that refused to accept dogma blindly. It sounds like he was trying to find a middle ground, a way to reform without tearing the church apart.
That's a very astute observation. Erasmus believed in reform, but he wanted it to come from within the church through education and reasoned debate, not through revolution and division. He saw the violence and fanaticism that were erupting as a result of the Reformation, and it deeply troubled him. He remained a staunch pacifist throughout his life, arguing that war was never the answer.
This idea of a scholar advocating for peace and dialogue in the midst of religious turmoil feels incredibly relevant today. We see so much division and conflict in our own world, often driven by ideology and extremism. It makes you wonder what Erasmus would make of our modern world.
I think he would recognize many of the same patterns: the dangers of unchecked authority, the manipulation of religious beliefs for political gain, the ease with which fear and hatred can spread.
It's sobering to think about. So as we move into the final chapter of Erasmus's life, he's facing criticism from all sides, navigating this turbulent religious landscape and still trying to promote his vision of peace and reform. What were his final years like?
His final years were a mix of things, he was still writing a lot, but also getting more and more disillusioned with the world.
Yeah.
And his health was declining.
Oh, okay.
But even with all the controversies, he never stopped writing and speaking out for his vision of a more peaceful and enlightened world.
It sounds like he was someone who was just driven to work right until the very end.
Absolutely.
What were some of the key themes or ideas he focused on?
Education remained a central focus for Erasmus throughout his life. But I think in these later years, he placed even greater emphasis on the moral and spiritual aspects of learning.
Interesting.
So it wasn't just about accumulating knowledge for its own sake. It was about cultivating inner virtue.
It's about being a better person.
That's right.
And it makes me think of what you said earlier, this Christian piety.
That's a great connection.
It was so central to his thinking.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Erasmus believed that true education should nurture what he called Christian piety. But for him, this didn't mean blind obedience to dogma or empty rituals. It was about living a virtuous life. Guided by reason, compassion, and a deep understanding of the scriptures.
So it was still about this reason and faith coming together.
Very much in line with his humanist ideals.
He didn't want to just keep all of this locked away in monasteries.
No, he wanted to make it accessible to everyone.
So he was publishing translations, writing these engaging dialogues, using satire to spark debate.
That's right.
It's he was creating this intellectual toolbox for self-improvement to become a better person.
That's a great way to put it.
But was it all about individual growth, or did he see a bigger impact?
No, it wasn't just about individual betterment. He saw a connection between the moral and intellectual development of individuals and the well-being of society.
Gotcha.
He argued that a well-educated citizenry rooted in reason and virtue was essential for a just and peaceful world.
So basically, if people are better, then society will be better.
Exactly.
And it makes me think about his pacifism, his opposition to war.
Yes.
Was that part of that?
Absolutely. For Erasmus, war represented the ultimate failure of reason and morality. It was barbaric. Driven by greed, pride, lack of empathy.
So basically the opposite of what he was trying to cultivate in people. And it's crazy how relevant it feels today.
All right.
We see all of this political polarization, the spread of misinformation, this threat of violence. It's we're living through an Erasmian nightmare.
It's uncanny, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Erasmus saw how easily people can be swayed by propaganda, prejudice, religious fanaticism.
Totally.
And he believed that education, critical thinking, open dialogue were the antidotes to these societal ills.
So what you're saying is we need more Erasmus.
Perhaps we do.
In the world today.
Mm-hmm. He urged people to listen to opposing viewpoints. To engage in reasoned debate. To strive for understanding, even amidst disagreements.
So basically have those tough conversations.
Yes.
And be willing to
That's right.
learn and listen.
Absolutely.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Erasmus, what do you think is like his most enduring legacy?
I think what's so fascinating about Erasmus is that while he was a man of his time, the issues he raised are timeless.
Totally.
Universal. So his life and work remind us that knowledge is a powerful tool for positive change. But it requires critical thinking, a willingness to challenge assumptions, a commitment to open and honest debate.
And that's basically the heart of this show. We're trying to get people to engage in those things. So for our listener out there who specifically requested this deep dive, what's like one thing?
I think a key takeaway is Erasmus's unwavering belief in the power of education, not just to shape individuals, but to transform society. So he believed learning could liberate us from ignorance, prejudice, even our own worst impulses.
It's a good message.
And that's a message worth holding on to.
Especially today.
Especially in our own complex and challenging times.
Yeah, I love that. And listener, if you're out there, I encourage you, keep exploring Erasmus's work.
That's right.
Dive into the praise of folly, explore his translations. You might be surprised at how relevant his ideas still are.
Absolutely.
Even after all these centuries.
Erasmus's legacy of scholarship, satire, a commitment to peace continues to inspire and provoke, urging us to think deeply, to laugh at folly, and to never give up on the pursuit of a more just and enlightened world.
Well said.
Thank you.
And on that note, we will wrap up our deep dive
Sounds good.
into the world of Erasmus. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
On this intellectual adventure.
Absolutely.